It looks like it is recording now. We have unfortunately forgotten to record before, and it makes us very sad. So we are on record, and we will also provide you with a recording of this. It's not a webinar, it's a meetup. We'll send that to you later after the thing. So let's go over the agenda for today, and then I'll do a couple introductions. So basically how Museum Minds meetups work is that we have about 5 or 10 minutes up front of just kind of housekeeping, introduction, telling you more about what we do. 20-25 minutes-ish of interactive learning. And then we take literally like a 2 to 3 minute intermission where we can get up and stretch. You're obviously welcome to leave at that time if you'd like, but sometimes the best part is actually the networking and Q&A. So it's basically half learning, half networking, and Q&A, where we can really dive deeper into some of the questions that you might have. So who are these people? And you'll see that there is only one person right here talking. And I'll talk about the one on the right in just a second. So my name is Rainey Robison. My business is Neptune Sugar Marketing and Design. I work primarily with arts and culture organizations to help them elevate their audience outreach and marketing. I also have an MFA in photography, and I formerly taught at the New England School of Photography in Boston. So this is a topic I'm really excited to talk about today. The one on the right is Beth Hauswert, my partner in crime, I guess you could say, for Museum Minds. It's not always an easy thing to say. She is at the Children's Museum Conference right now in Albuquerque, so she is not here today, but I will do my best to give a slight introduction about her. She is a museum consultant and coach. She has over 20 years of experience in the museum world, particularly children's museums. And she works a lot with museums that are going under, or that are kind of going through transition, whether that they're in a emerging museum, or there's a leadership change, and she does all sorts of workshops for staff training and things like that. So hopefully I've done Beth a good job of introducing her, but we will direct you to her website later so you'll know a little bit about her. But typically it's both she and I who are on Museum Minds. And the last thing I want to go over before we dive into the topic is, like, what is this? What is Museum Minds all about? So Beth and I met maybe 2 years ago in a business mastermind, and we immediately clicked for a couple of reasons. First of all, we both have museum backgrounds. Again, she has a children's museum background. I have an art gallery, I guess, background. And we just noticed a lot of overlap in terms of what we do. We have independent businesses, but there's a lot we relate about and can talk about. And we also are kind of goofballs. You probably won't get all of the goofball energy today because she's not here, but we immediately clicked about that. And we said, all these people keep asking us all these questions about museums, about marketing or about staff or partnerships or fundraising. And maybe there's a place or a space that we can create where we can have those conversations. So we hold Museum Minds every month, the second Wednesday of every month at this time. It is always free. We do talk about workshops at the end, but they're completely optional. But this is just a space that we invite you to pop in as we come up with different topics. We're about a year into it now and going strong. People are showing up, people are getting to know each other, and people seem to really appreciate the topics that we're talking about. So we will keep you posted about future topics as well. But I'm excited to talk about photography today. So let's dive in. So again, you're here at Photos That Don't Suck. And I'm really curious because, again, this is one of our higher registrations, what drew you to the topic. And I'm going to see if I can, oh, I maybe can see the chat. I don't know if it's going to show to you. Do you guys see the chat too now that I pulled it up? But I have a question, first of all, and I just want to know what you think. Like, why was this title? Why did it draw you in? What makes you think that photos suck? Or why do you think maybe your photos suck? So I'm going to pull up the chat here and kind of look at some of the answers. Or more specifically, what do you struggle with your own photography? So I'm going to look at the chat. Hopefully we'll get a few answers in there. Content is hard. Much decision exhaustion. Yes. Bad lighting. We'll talk about that. lighting in the museum, that can be a little bit tricky. If they're boring, have poor lighting, taking photographs of objects, photos of people being respectful. Oh, wow. So many things. And these are honestly things that, I mean, I could turn this into an entire course. We're obviously not going to get to all of these, but this is really helpful in kind of knowing where you're coming from. And the last thing I'd like you to put in the chat, and then I'll dive in, is my photos don't look like the ones I see on Instagram. That's a great answer. I love that. But what are photos? And this leads to the next question. What do photos look on Instagram? What do you like about them? Is it just the opposite? Is it good lighting? Is it, they look more natural, clean and bright? They're interactive, emotional, engaging. Colors pop. Okay, these are such great answers. Natural and beautifully staged. Okay. Well, again, what we're going to talk about is definitely not comprehensive. We're really just skimming the surface, but it's really my hope that you'll walk away with at least a handful of really easy things you can do to improve your photography for social media. So let's start here. So I have 5 different topics I want to talk about, and I think we'll get through all 5. We still have, I want to stop at the half hour. I'll stop at 4 if we have to, but I'm calling this sucky photo number 1. This is just a funny stock image of a guy that I believe is yawning because, he's so bored with some of the photos out there. So let's start with bad lighting. So, and I'm going to show a lot of photos that I've taken. Again, I literally have a degree in photography. I take so many bad photos and then correct them. I mean, it takes years sometimes to really, really get to where you want to do, or where you want to be. But again, a lot of times they're just really quick fixes, and you start to train your eye and you start to go, oh, no, that's not good. I know what I need to do. So this is just like I was just going through my phone looking for bad lighting photos. So this was this delicious, actually, peanut sauce noodle dish that I made at a friend of mine's house. And I just thought, oh, I think this needs to go on Instagram. And I took this photo just in the kitchen, and it had an overhead lighting. And it's just super flat and kind of, I mean, I'm kind of hungry, so it kind of looks good, but honestly, I think it's a little bit unappetizing a little bit. And I just thought, this just looks flat. It looks gross. It just doesn't look very interesting. So I literally took the same bowl of food into a different room. I'm guessing I took a few bites by then because it looks a little bit different, but I just put it next to a window. And window lighting, especially north-facing windows, can give some of the most beautiful kind of soft lighting. It's directional, so it has a little bit of shadows, but it just gave so much more interest, and I think made the food look a lot more appetizing than the one on the left. So again, just quick fix. Just walked in the other room, changed that. Lighting outside can be a little bit tricky, and I really would encourage you to just become an observer of light and start to just identify, like, what kind of light is this, and what kind of light is this, and what did Rainey say about this kind of light? So this is a artist residency that I work with in Wyoming. And I was up there last fall, and I was just kind of trying to capture different photos and walking around, and they just really weren't, great. I don't know. And really, because I think the ones on the left, it just was really cloudy. And it just, sometimes cloudiness is just kind of like bleh, it's flat light, just kind of like that peanut sauce bowl that I showed you. The one in the middle, though, I want to say isn't super bad. Like sometimes colors can really pop, and it looks like the clouds are kind of coming, you get a little bit of a mix there. But one of my former professors, I went to school in the Northwest, he actually will only photograph on cloudy days because he just likes the way that colors pop, and he just doesn't want harsh shadows in terms of the content that he's photographing. He tends to go to and photograph like old towns and signs and things like that. So it's not necessarily bad, but it can be a little bit flat. And then the one on the right is, of course, that sort of like almost noon o'clock, sort of harsh sun that is probably in most cases not one of the worst times to shoot anything, unless you're specifically trying to get harsh shadows like textures on rocks or, something like that. So the funny thing is, though, is that this is also really bad for portraiture, so if you take someone out, and it's funny, my father-in-law, he said, I am the one who taught him to go in the shade. He said his whole life, he was always taking photos of his kids in the direct sunlight. and they were always squinting, and he just thought that was what you're supposed to do because it's big and bright. But you tend to squint, it's not very flattering, you get harsh shadows. So just kind of avoid that. There are tricks about ways you can do it that like wedding photographers have, you know, because sometimes they have to shoot in those circumstances. But yeah, it can be a little bit tricky. Now, again, this cloudiness that I just said is boring is fantastic for portraits. It can create some of the most beautiful soft lighting on people's faces. Like it's almost like you put a giant softbox on the sun. And it's one of my favorite conditions to photograph in. Again, if you have, you know, you end up on a sunny day, then just go choose full shade for portraits. And you've probably heard of the golden hour before, but it's one of the most beautiful times to photograph in that early morning or late afternoon when the sun's starting to set and it creates those golden tones. Portraits can be really beautiful. In this case, you get that backlit sort of halo that they try to mimic in studios. Sometimes you have to add like a teeny bit of flash to kind of even it out, because sometimes this can cause silhouetting for people, but overall it's just such a beautiful kind of dreamy part of the day. So just kind of, you know, again, I'd encourage you just kind of watch the light. And in fact, photography literally means writing with light. It's one of the most important things that you should be thinking about in your photographs. Before I move on to the last one, I just wanted to give you a quick and easy way to take portraits. These are obviously posed portraits, and we'll talk about candids in a minute. My friend Brandon is running the chat and letting people in, so he may recognize some of these people that we used to work, or I used to work with. But I was given the task of taking faculty portraits when I used to work in an art department. And I don't actually have a lighting kit. It's just not something, I'm not really into studio lighting. And I noticed there was this space between these two double doors that had a white wall and this really beautiful window light coming in. And I put the one there on the right because all I did was have somebody hold a reflector to direct the light back to the other side of the face. And you may notice, especially on the one at the left, he has a little bit darker. It's a little bit darker on the I guess his right side of his face. But overall, it's really nice and soft and avoids all those harsh shadows. So I really just wanted to show you, like, here's the like literal easiest way that you could take a portrait of someone. And you don't even have to have a reflector. You could use like a poster board or a foam core. Anything white will bounce that light back onto their face. So that's what I have for lighting. Again, each of these topics could be a workshop in and of itself. But let's go to sucky photos number 2. So that is bad composition. And I don't actually have any examples of bad composition, but I just want to give you a few tips and tricks here of things that you might think about. So I learned this a long time ago. They call it shoot from your boots. And I think the reason why we find this interesting is because we walk around all day at eye level, and everything we see is at our eye level. And then we tend to take our photos from eye level. And if you can just mix that up a little bit, suddenly it can take, you know, make a kind of ordinary photograph extraordinary, like the one on the left. You know, you really want to get down to the flower, you know, and to their view of the world. And especially on the right, especially with kids, you really want to get down at eye level. And so it doesn't look like you're looking down at them. And then it can also, the one in the middle, just again, mix it up. A lot of times they use this in movies to make people look a little more powerful, you know, things like that. So basically, again, any way you can kind of mix up that perspective, including getting up high if it's possible. Sometimes that just adds a little bit of interest and takes it away from that basic eye level. Composition and framing, it's something to think about, you know, especially that one on the left is just a little bit more interesting because he has this context, something is framing him. This landscape, I guess, if you will, in the middle is looking through a window. And over here on the right, Devil's Tower, you know, I thought it would just be a lot more interesting if it were framed by the autumn leaves rather than just go and take a direct photo of it. So it just, again, adds a little more interest. And these are really, really simple things that you can do. And I've always loved this picture by Georgia O'Keeffe, or of Georgia O'Keeffe by Arnold Newman, where he literally is framing her with a canvas. And I've just always thought this is one of the best examples of framing. But again, you don't have to, you know, do something like this. It could be as simple as a window or a door or a archway or something like that. The last thing I want to talk about in this section is the rule of thirds. I feel like it sometimes gets beaten to death in photography, but it is important to talk about. I imagine some of you have already heard of it before, but if you haven't, just in case, I'll kind of explain it. But if you were to divide a frame into thirds, a lot of times that intersection of those dots are some of the most interesting points to put your subject. And oftentimes, it's even just interesting to put somebody to the side. So I've heard this other term called dead center is deadly, which is not universal. I've seen a lot of dead center things that are actually really interesting, but just as a rule, just thinking about, oh, maybe I'll just move them to the side and then we can get this beautiful tree in the background or this beautiful landscape. So here are 3 portrait examples of where the rule of thirds was applied. The 2 on the left was the same artist residency. As you can see, their heads are landing just about in that third area right here too. She's being framed by her own work. She's kind of being framed by the trees. So that works. But then you might look over here at my friend Billy and say, well, she's dead center. What's wrong with that? She is, but her eyes are landing right here on this plane, this third plane. So again, something to just kind of think about, and it just kind of takes some time and it becomes something very natural to you. And at worst, you could always just take a photograph standing farther back and then crop it later. If you decide, oh, I didn't apply the rule of thirds. Now I think I can do it later in post-production or something like that. So again, just little things to mix up that sort of dead center, boring kind of portrait. Okay, second photo number 3. How are we doing on time? I think we're going to do just fine. Bad portraits. And again, I'm not trying to diss on anyone by showing bad portraits. I just see things sometimes online. I go, oh, that's a really great example of what I could show people, to try to work away from. So I saw this the other day. If some weird coincidence, the person that took this photo is in this room, I really apologize, but basically I just saw this on Facebook and it was somebody who it was like a city council or something saying, hey, we have a new office assistant or something, and this is her name. And I thought about it later and I said, oh, well, it's actually using the rule of thirds, but it's just kind of her sitting in her office. And I just don't think there's a lot of human interest, or there's not a lot of information outside of I'm the office assistant. I think we're interested in people at a different level. So here's I think a better photo. This is Tim Ferriss, who wrote the 4-Hour Work Week. I just took this from his website because I remembered it. But I just think we like to see, more of people, whether they like dogs or, even just, even if the dog wasn't there. I think that the context is a little bit more interesting in this environmental portrait. Or this one on the left is just like an IKEA employee, but it's just a little bit more of an interesting portrait than I think the other one. And on the right is Tim Ferriss again. And this is what they call kind of a hero image, where they're, folding their arms and look like I'm the new director of this museum or something. Those are really great images. You'll see them on LinkedIn a lot, but I just think the background is a little bit more interesting, a little more colorful. So just something to think about. Maybe if your building is really interesting, you can take the person outside or something like that. Excuse me. So another thing, and I noticed that people asked this question in the registration, was about candidates. So I wanted to talk about this for just a second. And again, we can talk more about it in the Q&A, but this was an exhibition that I was at with these 3 Native American artists. And this was before we took the formal picture, but I was just kind of interacting with them and kind of hey, let's take a goofy photo, and I actually didn't end up using these, even though I love them. I ended up using this one, which is much more posed. But at that point, I could tell they just felt a lot more relaxed and kind of oh, Rainy, she's taking our photo. So I just felt like they had kind of loosened up a little bit by the time that I had taken the actual kind of posed photo. And another thing that you can do is you have a burst mode on your phone, and on a DSLR, it's called continuous shooting, where if you just keep shooting past the time that they think like what I mean is when they think they're done being photographed, you keep photographing. And sometimes that moment that's like right after they think they're done and they laugh or look at somebody is like a beautiful, candid moment. So hopefully that answers some of the questions that were in there. But again, we can talk a little bit more about that. Okay, sucky photo number 4, butt shots. So this is specific to museums. I see it all the time. I'm guilty of it. I'm going to show you a photo where I'm guilty of this. But I think a lot of times people who are in charge of taking photographs, because a lot of times, again, it's not like you're able to just hire a professional every single time and it falls on, you know, whoever's shoulder to try to get some photos to get them on social media for an event. But I think a lot of times the photographer or person who's assigned being the photographer doesn't want to interfere, and they want to try to get those natural moments and just kind of observe and not like bug anybody. But I think what happens a lot of times is you get what I call butt shots. So, or the back sides of people. And they're not like inherently bad, but I think we can do better. So the one on the left is from some sort of public art post I saw on Facebook. And I thought this would have been a great opportunity for the photographer to say, hey, look at me, you know, even just to turn their head or to hold up what they were doing, I think would make this a lot more interesting. I think as the photographer, there is a certain degree of directing, I guess, that you have to do, whether it's getting stuff that out of the background that shouldn't be there, or just kind of trying to get people to interact with you a little bit. And you don't have to do it all night. I think one of the other questions was like, but I'm running the event. How am I supposed to be the photographer as well? And I think one of the best things is just to know I'm going to get XYZ shots, and the rest of the time I'm going to be managing the event. But when I do get those shots, this is how I'm going to approach it. So I don't think these photos are necessarily inherently bad. I kind of actually like this one on the left where they become these sort of silhouetted people and they're engaged with the photos. I took this one on the right when I was in Greece, just because I thought it was interesting how the people looked like the statues. They were kind of mirroring the statues in the background. So again, it's not like the worst thing in the world. It's just something I see over and over and over again. And here is one that I took just a couple months ago, maybe even a month ago. And it's just it's fine, you know, but again, you're getting the backsides of people. It's not very interesting. And I literally just walked over to the left and I said, hey guys, smile. And it's just an entirely different photograph and an entirely different interaction. And I feel a lot better about posting these things. Another thing that came up in the questions, which we can talk about, is permissions and, you know, things like that. So we can get to that when I get past this. And I think we have just enough time to get through common pitfalls, and then we'll take a teeny break and then go into Q&A. So sucky photos number 5 are just things to look out for. Again, these are things that I just keep noticing, and you'll start to notice and even call yourself out on certain things. But one thing is you don't want to crop people at the joints. So this isn't exactly at the joints, but the one on the right, for instance, this is actually the guy I used to work for at a photography school. I saw this on his Facebook page. So don't become friends with me on Facebook. I might steal your images for teaching purposes only. But the problem is it doesn't look like his limbs extend from the frame. And it doesn't mean you can't crop people. You just have to be kind of careful, or ask yourself, does it look like he has the rest of his arm, or that it exists, you know? What else do I have here? And this is one too that is very subtle and is really kind of getting nitpicky. And I still do this. I even just saw it in a photo the other day. I was like, oh, Rainey, why did you do that? But do you see how the horizon line is going through her neck? And that's like, people do this with oceans and horizon lines and all sorts of things all the time. And it's just not like the best place for a line to go through. I mean, it doesn't exactly like decapitate, but it just sort of isn't the best place for that. And you can see the photographer kind of corrected that. And as you can see, they got down a little bit lower as well to correct that. Flash is really tricky. And I know a lot of you guys are photographing in gallery spaces where either you feel like you need a flash, or if you don't use the flash, you're getting this sort of not always super beautiful lighting, so we can talk about that. But in general, just direct flash, whether it's on your iPhone, whether it's on a DSLR, is going to give you red eye. It's going to blow out, it's going to give you flat lighting, just like we talked about. It's not always the best. It's not always the funnest, but I will say, and this is something I want to learn on my iPhone, but when I shoot on a DSLR, you can dial down that flash to just be like a little teeny flash that just pops shadows out of people's face. So you don't get this kind of response or kind of photo from that direct flash. But if you can avoid it, I would avoid it. This is why people use bounce flash and things like that, that doesn't directly go into people's eyes. Help. I have a tree growing out of my head. So they call this merging in photography. And once you see it, you'll start to see it all over the place, and some people might just look at the photo and not think twice of it, but it really does look like this guy has horns or something like that. This is literally, I think, one of the funniest ones I've ever found online with merging. So she's got a spray coming out of her head. So again, just really be your own director. Just think, oh, does this look like something's growing out of their head? Oh, yes, it does. And sometimes you might not notice until after you've taken the photo. So look at your photo, go, oh, I think I need to move them to the left a little bit so this doesn't happen. And maybe they did this on purpose. I don't know. And I think this is either the last or close to last, but just mixed lighting. I always say choose one or the other. Don't try to do both, like the one on the left, trying to be in the shade and the sun at the same time. It's going to throw off your exposures. The photographer shadow, I think, is actually kind of funny. There's a whole book of photographer shadows that I own. And she's squinting and she's like, oh, the sun's in my eyes, so just, again, full shade is going to be a lot better in this situation. And that is it as far as what I have. Again, we are not done talking about photography, but before we take an intermission, I have just a couple of things to talk about, and then I will unshare screen and we'll talk about how the rest of today will go. So hopefully that was helpful and at least gave you like, oh yeah, I never thought about that, and a couple of quick tips and tricks that you can take with you. So before we do that, next month meetup is about capital campaigns. We love talking about fundraising here at Museum Minds, and we have a special guest, Ainsley Brozig, and I hope I'm saying her right, who is a rock star that has raised over $19 million and will be here to talk to us about how to do it without losing our minds. So that may not apply to all of you, but if some of you out there need to know more about fundraising, again, these are always free. We'd love to have you pop in and learn what you can. And a lot of times, we don't have any today, but we give out freebies and worksheets and things like that that can help you get more clarity in what you're trying to do. Brandon, if you can start throwing things in the chat if you haven't already. So Brandon should be putting the registration for this if you're interested in registering. We will also send it to you on email. So if you forget, we'll remind you. I just wanted to let you know too that Beth and I do free 30-minute discovery calls. Just if there's something that you are curious about and need to talk about, or if you want to see if consulting would be a fit, we're happy to talk to you for free and see what you're dealing with. So Brandon, if you can put our contact information in there, again, we'll send it to you as well. And then the last thing I want to do is talk about paid workshops that we both offer. You're under no obligation, obviously, to buy these, but we do like to talk about these. And every once in a while, we get people to register from Museum Minds, and they always love it. So Beth offers workshops. I don't think she has a specific date just yet. She offers these every month, but she's, like I said, she's at a conference right now, so she may be taking a break right now. But she offers workshops on museum engagement, industry knowledge, staff confidence, visitor satisfaction, and all sorts of things. And she's been doing these workshops for quite some time. So if you can put her website in the chat, you can learn more about Beth and what she does. And like I said, I am on the marketing side of things and audience outreach. And I thought this might be a really interesting topic for this crowd. And I hope that you'll join me for my upcoming paid workshop. So on June 4th, I'm going to be basically expanding on quite a bit what we've been talking about today. So not just like how to take better photos, but talking about how to make social media more engaging and more, I guess, sticky, we'll be talking about hook points and, how to get people engaged within the first 3 seconds of your reel. We'll talk about storytelling in imagery, like the ones this IKEA ads well, there's 3 IKEA ads here, but with the pets, they're telling stories and they're getting people's attention. And we'll be talking about, just storytelling in general with photo and video, but I'm also going to give out 4 bonuses. And again, this is just $47. Over time, the price of this will probably go up, but I am going to give you a shot list so you don't have to think about what you're going to photograph at events. Social media storytelling framework. I'll give you a 1-sheet basically summarizing everything we talk about in the workshop. I'll talk about hook points, which again is that first 3 seconds to get people to look and stick around. And this is a huge thing. I think this is one of the biggest failures on most of social media, is just getting people to watch that first, very, very, very first part. And we'll talk about this digital storytelling formula too, that I've talked about in Museum Minds before. And it is a 1-hour workshop, but I will be sticking around for 30 minutes after, so you can ask me anything. So again, social media that sticks, we will tell you about it. You can register for it if you'd like. If you are not interested, we'd like to see you next month at our free Museum Minds. So now we have an intermission. I'm going to unshare. Hopefully everyone didn't. Hopefully most people are still there. Yay, people are still here. So what we do is literally take like 3 minutes just to get up, get a glass of water, kind of stretch, and then we go straight into Q&A. So I will see you guys in just a couple minutes, and we hope that you'll stick around. Okay, I'm going to bring us back. I was able to get a glass of water, and we have about 23 minutes to chat about whatever we'd like. So if people want to start turning cameras back on, and is anyone willing to put themselves out there? Did anything come up during what I was talking about or your initial thoughts before you even got here about questions you have about candids, about lighting? Is there anything you'd like me to expand on?
Do you have any tips and tricks for photographing like small sculptures or still objects that are framed?
Yes, but let me ask you this. Are they in the gallery?
No, we can take them
Okay.
down and bring them to our offices and work with that.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, in fact, you can set up pretty easily. And if you want, I can try to remember to see if I can find like a YouTube video on this. Because I was actually asked to do this recently, but it was in the gallery and it was really challenging because I was stuck with just their light. They're like, you can't move anything. So the fact that you can move it to a space is really good. And you can kind of jerry rig your own sort of like how big are the sculptures, I guess, would be the
Probably like this big,
okay.
like small.
Okay. Oh, it's love it when Zoom does that. Um, yeah, so a few things you can do. I mean, one thing that can be a little tricky is you're going to get that horizon line. So you can even buy like a roll of paper and just kind of make those sort of horizonless, backgrounds. And then basically what you want to do is have two 45-degree angle lights because they cancel each other out. And you can literally buy these at the like hardware store. It doesn't have to be a fancy lighting kit. You just buy those ones that have like the silver,
Mhm.
whatchamacallit, what do you call that?
The clamp.
Yeah, with the clamp, exactly. Like I had two clamp lightings, and again, just two 45-degree angles, and it tends to give you really nice, even lighting. And you can also, if you really want to soften the light, you can buy umbrellas as well. That they're not very expensive, honestly. Or you could buy just like I think the first lighting kit I bought in grad school was those floodlights, and I think it was $150 or something. It really wasn't very much, and it had the little holes that you can put umbrellas in and things like that. But for the most part, this is how we photograph photos too. We do it downward. We photograph with two lights downward because again, they cancel the shadows out. So that's kind of my best advice there. Another thing you can do, depending on the size, is sometimes you could just put it by a window, and then like those portraits just sort of reflect some light back, and that can be really, really nice. So is that helpful? Anyone else
Yes.
have any advice? Any other questions? Let's see, I'm going to go through your questions here. Another thing that came up, and I think that this, Brandon put something in the chat. Hold on. I've seen people, let's see. I've seen people use phone camera to create an angled light and shadow. Can you talk about that more, Brandon? Do you mind?
Sure. So, hi everyone. In classes and teaching curriculum, a lot of times I've seen students actually try to create like turn on their phone camera, for an example, and actually use that as slightly directional lighting or mood lighting, for example. So if you have a moderately lit area where you can avoid or it's pretty well lit, but you don't have access to the natural light or the stronger light, using a phone from a specific angle potentially could create a subtle shadow effect and also bring some brightness to a specific focal area of your composition or of your object, for example. Sometimes this works a little better with like a sculpture where if it's slightly shiny, let's say like marble or a metal material, for example, versus wood. And sometimes it just gives a nice little like implied directional light.
No, you don't mean the flashlight on the camera
I
or the phone.
do.
You do. That is
I
what you mean.
do.
Okay.
Sorry, I mean the flashlight on a camera.
Okay.
Because like
Interesting.
I have a newer iPhone. It doesn't work in every situation, but if you have moderate lighting and you're
Mhm.
trying to get a little bit more, I don't know, brightness or shadow on some three-dimensionality, it can be a nice little hack if you don't have another option at the moment.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. And I think too, there's probably a million hacks on TikTok too, or things like that. But again, I think that photography and especially lighting can be really overwhelming. And I don't think you need half of the equipment that a professional photographer would tell you you need. There's so many hacks for things like that. But you might think about window lighting too. Because again, that's just that really soft. And then maybe we'll give you like a slight directional shadow like it did in those portraits, you know, so it is a little, there's still some dimension. So yeah, I would just kind of play around with that. Jumping to the chat, any tips for dealing with glare for framed works, objects behind glass? Now, I wish I had a better answer for this because I know there are some people who do this for a living. There are filters that can sometimes cut a lot of that glare. But it's a little bit tricky because if it's a shiny surface, it's a shiny surface. So, you know, if there's a way to get that out of the glass, that can be good. Or if anyone here happens to be a museum photographer for their collections, you know, I would love to know. Again, this is not something that I do, but again, like I know, for instance, if you're photographing like a mannequin behind a window, there is a filter that can cut like 90% of that glare off. I just don't know if you can get rid of all of it. So again, I would be open to any other suggestions that you guys have. We also have mostly youth visitor students, so any tips managing the sensitivity when it comes to minors? And I'm glad you asked this. And in fact, I asked Beth because she used to work at children's museums. And I said, hey, you know, I think I know the answer to this, but what is your experience with this? And what she said was at this, when people purchase the ticket, there's a sign there that says basically the purchase of your ticket is a photo release, you know, unless you tell us otherwise. I'm sure it was worded better than what I just said. But so she said, for the most part, there haven't been any problems. She said, however, like for instance, if there was a field trip of at-risk students coming in, they probably just wouldn't take photos at all, you know. And it always can't hurt to ask, or, you know, I've even seen tips about if you're walking around an event, you have a name tag that says, if you don't want your photo taken, please tell me. But there is kind of, for the most part, at least when it comes to adults, that if you're in public, you might get your photo taken. Are there any people who have experience with this that would be willing to chime in? And Caitlin, or are you willing to talk about more specifically what you're worried about?
Or I can jump in. We do have a photo release, but
You do?
I think there are times like on field trips where we're just fine, you know, like even though it's mentioned, it's not been like clear to everyone in the group. And so we just don't want to upset any of our visitors because obviously their experience is more important than the photography, but
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I would always, you know, lean on the side of caution, especially when it comes to kids for sure. And again, you know, if you photo releases, even printed, you know, paper ones, if you really need the photo, you know, just make sure that, you know, like with a parent, for instance, saying, hey, I just want to make sure this is okay. Could you sign this really quickly? But I personally, this wasn't even an event. I was at a museum, I think in Boston, and somebody just walked up and took a photo of my daughter and then walked away. It was just a photographer. It had nothing to do with the museum. And I was like so angry. I was, what are you doing? You know, so I think that parents can be really sensitive to that and pictures of their children online. But again, going back to what Beth said, it sounded like it's never been a huge issue, but if you're really, really concerned, then I would get that written consent or just let it go. I think is probably my best answer for that.
yeah, thank you.
Let's see. Marianne, did we already ask was that you who asked it? No. Any advice on pictures of exhibits with in plastic vitrine? Oh, do you mean like the plexiglass, Marianne? I'm guessing that it's a shiny surface, so I think similarly, it's called a polarizing filter. I don't know if you can get one. Oh yeah, somebody just said that. Circular polarizer works sometimes. So that can really, really help. With it, again, sometimes it depends on the angle that you're shooting at too. Sometimes if you shoot at just like a slight angle instead of straight on, it works a little bit better. But it's tricky. We've been playing in with a Photoshop filter. I didn't know there was one. Erica, are you willing to talk about that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's hit and miss. It's
Mhm.
part of like the new, if you pay for your Photoshop subscription and you're using that program,
Mhm.
it's like one of the neural filters. So it does do a pretty good job, like straight on, of removing glass and that kind of glare. Um, but again, it's like it's hit and miss. So I'm always trying to like minimize that anyway. But
Yeah.
if you're paying for the subscription, it might be something
Yeah.
that people are, play with.
Is it an AI filter or just something you kind of use the sliders?
There's some element to that. I mean, you can customize it, but it is within that like neural filter, category. So again, that's another nuance or another level to that.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's a
Another
new
thing,
genre of
oh, go ahead. Sorry,
there's a
what,
new
Brandon?
genre of neurofilters, which it's basically just effects and they're AI rooted tools. And I have used it to remove the glass and glare from someone sitting in a cafe. And you're right, with seeing it direct on, it worked really, really well. And that's my experience, but I was totally shocked.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, and some of the things that some of the AI filters can do is pretty amazing too. One issue I run into a lot of times is photographing in low lighting, and typically I am photographing with a DSLR, but when it's really dark, those images can be so grainy. And they just start kind of, I mean, it's not like the end of the world, but they just look really broken apart. And Lightroom has a filter that it takes a long time, like it takes like a minute per photo, but I can just go to lunch or something. But it cleans it up so much. It's really incredible what some of those tools are doing. Let's see. Thank you, Kathy. We asked the head teacher when they show up if there are any students who we should not photograph. That's a really good to point out too if there's any specific ones. Caitlin, have you had any horror stories of it backfiring? Our worst case scenario is we use a photo in print marketing and we can't pull it down. Do you mean of like minors and things like
Yeah,
that?
yeah,
Okay.
sorry, I was just responding
Yeah.
to Kathy. I was like, oh my
Yeah. Oh,
gosh, I
thank
wonder
you.
if she knows, like,
Yeah.
if she's had anything terrible happen, so I can keep
No,
it
we
in
haven't
mind.
had anything terrible happen, although there could always be. But they are in a public space and it's understood, but we
Mhm.
just ask, because
Yeah.
teachers will know because their own schools have policies about photography. So if there's, a kid who's for some reason their parents have not allowed it, we just make sure that we don't photograph them, or if we do, it's from the back or whatever.
Yeah,
And we go through the photos after. But again, we haven't had an issue. I've also done what everybody else does, which is imported the children of staff members to stand around and look like children because we know that we don't care. My kids were like 3 and 5 in photos for ages, which was really funny because now they're like 20, and I think those photos are still being used by some of the institutions that I worked for. But
yes.
Yes. Yes. Tricky. Well, thank you again for all of your feedback, because again, that's not my strong point, but again, I think it's something we do have to tread lightly. Travis, thank you. The Photoshop filter is in Camera Raw. I don't know if everybody knows what that is, but now I'm going to be looking for that in Camera Raw. Polarizing filter. Any other questions that you guys have? The only trouble I have with some filters is the uncanny valley. That's hilarious. That makes them look like kind of real, but not real. And that's another thing too, I thought about adding to the pitfalls is over editing. I think a lot of times people can push those sliders just a little too far. So the saturation is too bright. Sharpening is a big thing that it's my biggest pet peeve, like these over sharpened images that start to have these like dark lines. Any tips on learning how to fix historic photos that are blown out or grainy? It's funny, I think they may have AI things to fix things like that, but I have gone in blown out is hard because I'm guessing the detail is not there. But grainy, usually you can fix, or like I had a photograph of my grandfather when he was a child, and he used to always joke that when he was a little girl, because he would wear a dress, because they used to dress boys in dresses. Just a little funny side note. But anyway, I found a photo of his and it had like a big seam, and I spent quite a bit of time, but like going between the healing brush and the clone stamp, but I cleaned it up pretty well on my own. But I think, again, as we're getting more AI, there's some things that can clean up things pretty well, or at least do the bulk of the work, and then you can fix things, as long as, again, it doesn't throw it into that uncanny valley. But has anyone else had to deal with that? Thought I saw someone go off mute.
Oh, it's Stephanie Lawrence.
Hi,
Hey,
Stephanie.
everybody. I just had another question about shooting objects, if you don't mind.
Oh, sure.
So I have to photograph a lot of books and flat objects, and sometimes the angle is weird because you're going to see it upright on screen where it's a flat image, on a table or something. And if you have any tips on that, like if it's better to shoot from an angle or just shoot it overhead or things like that.
Typically what I would do is I would treat it kind of like I was talking with those 45-degree angles, but I don't know if you've heard of a copy stand. We use these all the time in photography, where like if we are photographing our own photography, and it basically sets your camera, you screw it on and it's facing down. And then, are you putting one in there? What are you putting in there, Brandon? In the chat? Is that a copy stand? Anyway, same thing. It has two 45-degree angles that point down, and then you hang your camera up here and it shoots down. So that's probably the best way, just to get the basic photo of it. Are you talking about kind of how you would display it on your website though, or something like that? Like how to take
Sorry,
it from
for social media.
Say
Yeah,
it again.
like for social media. So like if I have a display or
Yeah.
something that we're presenting on or part of a program that we want to highlight, sometimes it's on a book stand or it can be flat or things like that. And so it's just making it more dynamic, I think.
Yeah. So a couple things you can do. I mean, you could take it at an angle, take a couple different versions. You can add drop shadows later in Photoshop, and I wonder if Canva has something similar too. It's a really easy thing to do, but sometimes that gives it a little more dimension and doesn't look like a book is just like floating there. And then there is also something called Place It. And I think they have a version of this in Canva too, where I mean, I don't think this is what you want to do, but say you wanted that book on a mug or a t-shirt or something like that. But they have books, like fake book covers, that you can just drop it into, and it looks like a book is sitting there on a table or something like that. So, and it's pretty easy to do, especially Canva. It can actually tell, you just drop it and it just does the work for you. If you do it in Photoshop, it's a little bit more hands-on, but I think things like that, again, they're coming up with all these tools that can make it look more interesting than just this book straight on, so there is a tool, I can't remember what it's called, but Canva has a bunch of apps you can download. One is free and some are paid, that and one again is called Place It. So I hope that helps. Anyone else? So since we're on like the last 3 minutes, what are things you guys would love to hear more about in the future, either in Museum Minds or paid workshops and things like that? Are there other photography related or marketing related things that you guys are just like, oh, I just really wish somebody would help me with this? So I'm just going to want to survey, because I want to be here to help you and not just talk about things that I like to talk about, which I obviously like to talk about photography. But is anyone willing to shout out in our last 3 minutes something career and mentorship? Let's see. Oh, thank you, Brandon. That's a pretty cool setup. Is that expensive? So you have to photograph a lot of documents. I have been doing Instagram reels for a museum. Do you recommend filming these on a phone camera or is there higher quality camera? That's such a good question. So there's a guy named Brendan Kane. He wrote a book called A Million Followers in 30 Days or something. And he wrote a book called Hook Points. And he actually says that we nowadays tend to prefer lower quality video. It feels more real to us. And I even noticed this on Domino's Pizza the other day. They just had like a normal person like eating pizza. I'm like, oh, Domino's is so good, you know. Like I think that we actually feel like some of those polished videos are trying too hard to sell to us, and there has been a trend toward just like basic camera video. You know, I mean, some of the higher end brands you're still going to see things like that, but I would not feel like for your social media you need to in any way invest in like a really fancy camera, maybe a DSLR or something, like a low end one or something. But again, I don't think there's, if you see what's online, I don't think there's a lot of pressure to put anything that's super duper polished. Career and mentorship, advertising, this is so helpful. So I will take all this into account as we're planning future topics, but we would love to see you at future Museum Minds. And Beth will send an email maybe in a day or two because she's at the conference, but we will send you a recording of this. We will send you next month's topics. We'll send you information about our workshops, and hopefully we will see you all again. So unless anyone has any last minute questions, I think we'll probably wrap it up. Okay. Thank you, everyone. It was so great to talk about photography to an engaged audience. I really appreciate it. And we hopefully will see you next month. All right. Thank you.